Okay, after we record this like a million times, I sound like I'm crazy. And so,
Good evening, Sami Bayayan Hopi Amatsewa. My username is Batang Hoya, but everybody calls me JD, and I am from the Hopi Nation. I'm 4/4, and you are not crazy at all. What you are recognizing is that coming of age, I'm in my 30s, you are finally starting to realize in your maturity that we as a society hold a separate space for women. And as a two spirit male, identifying male, right? We grow up in a cultural system, especially in a traditional sense, where many of our cultural societies dictate to us there are spaces for men and there are spaces for women. And it's not that we do not have any female leadership within our societies, but they have a set time and place in when they are meant to hold that leadership, when they are meant to hold the podium. And it's just, and I think with any society it's like that. It's not just native tribes. And I'm speaking in my own experience specifically to my own cultural upbringing, where we have certain societies within our cultural system, our belief system, in what the women are charged with and what the male are charged with. The way it was explained to me by one of my siblings is how they explained it is basically it's our own system of separation of powers. And so in a traditional sense, we are taught that it's meant to maintain a balance. But in a modern sense, right, when it pertains to modern political representation and exploitation, I think we as a native society are still, one, from the aspect of cultural preservation, we want to reflect back on our history and trying to maintain some of our cultural identity and practices so that we can maintain one, tribal sovereignty, but in recognition to the uniqueness of our culture, right? Many of our elders, many of our traditionalists, not always elders, some younger people also have traditional views. I share them, again, just because of my upbringing and what I was taught, what I was lectured on, what I was told. Are those traditional methods in perspectives of even the women, right? You guys are taught it's a man's place to be a spokesperson. It's a man's place to be in a position of representation. And from my own cultural aspect, that is coming out of place of protection. Because when you are in a position of vulnerability, right, you become a target. Other people know who you are. You have to fulfill that social capacity, right? And traditionally, what we believe is that the woman is charged with safeguarding the domestic environment. And so, for the sake of their own protection, right, and again, my own culture, I'm not saying all Native people, but from the cultural perspective in which I was raised, is that for the protection of the women, that is why those males are seen modernly, in a modern perspective, as being predominantly representatives and spokesperson for whatever society, for whatever social gathering and stuff like that, right? But even from a young age, young girls are taught, this is a man's role, that's a man's role. Let the men do this, and it's more so behind the scenes types of things. And it's not that men don't recognize what women contribute and what they do for our societies. It's a different kind of respect. And so that is what I think we are struggling to comprehend, is peeling back those layers of modern perception of representation and equity and advocacy in visibility, traditionalism versus modern ways, And that is forever going to clash. I'm pretty sure many Native families have these. Well, at least in my family, we do. We always have these types of discussions, right? Where I am a big, strong component, again, just due to my disability, due to my two-spirit identity. I am a hard advocate for modernization and like representation and advocacy for certain communities pertaining to my identity. And not that I'm necessarily shut down, but there's a little bit of a buffer and a pushback from my family in a traditional sense, so we as Native people are forever struggling to, again, walk two roads, balance both worlds. And so I just wanted to add this perspective to the equation, to the overall equation. But as two-spirit males, I think as we get older, we begin to recognize that sense of unbalancedness in what would be seen as, unfair representation in a modern sense when it comes to modern platforms. And if you look at a lot of the Native men on this platform and how they talk about women, even I always call this out when I was a younger boy, in those traditional settings, even in the traditional environments during ceremony, there is a certain way that, straight Native men will talk about women. And it's true for any culture, right? And I think as two-spirit males, we begin to recognize that. And we begin to question, and we begin to say, wait, hold up. You begin to notice that the dynamic isn't always equal. But kind of take a step back and recognize that, yes, every tribal society has strong women. Every tribal society, I brought this up years ago too on my YouTube channel, has a narrative of a historical woman figure from our societies that stepped into a male role, that stepped into a leadership role, that stepped into a warrior role, right? In Hopi, the story of Hehewuti. Modernly, the story of Lori Paestiwa, So Wilma Mankiller, like we do have representation in our tribal histories of women and two-spirit individuals who stepped into a leadership role of representation. So it's not that women are always shut out, but it takes special circumstances for women to rise to that occasion and to be recognized by their tribal societies, just because of the reflections of our traditional cultures and customs.